Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. And this is my favorite kind of indie book review because it's one of the ones where I just get to talk about how much I loved the book for like 15 to 20 minutes. And that book is Coliseum Arcanist by Shami Stovall. This is the third in the Frith Chronicles series, and I will have the first two reviews down in the description below. You really should watch those first because I'm going to be talking about a ton of spoilers from there, so definitely check those out. And if you like those, I will also have my review for Shami Stovall's sci-fi series, Starmark Rising, there too. I know people prefer fantasy generally over sci-fi, but I need her to know that I need the sequel to come out. Anyway, this is the third book. It is the chunky book. It is 700 pages, and it makes that big book sound when you hit it. And it follows the Arcanist apprentices from the first two books as they travel to the city of Thronehold. Now, Thronehold is basically the capital of this giant empire, and they're kind of in need of the queen's help because a world serpent might be low-key waking up, and they're really worried about it. But when they get there, they find out there's also this dragon tournament taking place. So they're like, okay, we can also do this tournament to kind of like, cover up the fact that we're here for a thing we don't want anyone else to know. And it works really well. Although, this is a very long book, and it's one of those books where you will have to already love the world and the characters, because the crux of the action, the actual tournament, doesn't take place until over halfway through. Now, I love this world, and I even mentioned before that I wanted to see more of the world and more of the characters, so having the first half be essentially exploring the world and the characters, I loved it. I even mentioned, I think, the first one that I was really bummed that you didn't see a lot of the Arcanist apprentices aside from like Volk and Ilya and like a little bit Zaxxas and Addie. Adelgis, especially in the first one, was a whatever side character. He gets a lot more page time in this one. He's more interesting. He is the most interesting in this book he's been in the series so far, and I'm not sure if that's good or not. Like, there are some moments where I was like, ooh, you are far more interesting, but why am I maybe getting sinister vibes, kind of? Like, he doesn't turn to the dark side. And I wouldn't reveal it if he did. I wouldn't spoil something like that. But, like, things happen. And it's a little bit, you'll have to read it. But Adele just takes a much more interesting turn. He's got his own subplot in this one. You've discovered in the second one that he's got the Abyssal Leech in him, and it becomes a way bigger problem in this one, and just thinking about it. So that's a really big subplot of this one is Adelgis and the Abyssal Leech and what his father does. His father's Eldrin is also the coolest thing. I think it's one of my favorite Eldrin so far, the Relic Keeper. I won't spoil it because the actual nature of the beast does not tell you what the Relic Keeper actually looks like, but whew. Anyway, the group in this whole story is becoming much more of a found family here. There's one moment where there's fighting, some big things are going on, and Volk is separated from the group, and he finds them again. And he is overwhelmed with relief and realizes how much they matter to him, and it comes across as so genuine. I believe it. I believe not just Volk and his affection towards the guildmates, but even like them within each other. Like Zaxxas shows a lot more of his admittedly broguish and tactless version of support. He's not subtle at all, but his heart's in the right place. He's still very braggadocious. He's not made like this entire fantastic character change. Like, no, he's still a little braggart that I kind of want to see hit in the face occasionally. Not hard, just occasionally. Hexa and Addie actually don't have that much to do in this world, but the number one world building that I loved was the development of the Eldrin themselves. So the actual Coliseum, the tournament, is beautifully done world building in this way. Essentially, Volk has this book at one point that is basically a high fantasy Pokedex, and he uses it to read about the Eldrin before the matches. Either he wants to know who he's up against or who someone else in the Frith Guild is up against, and it's kind of really nice that the minute he learns it, you then see it in the world. Like, if you guys are like, oh, this Eldrin isn't susceptible to poison, therefore Hexa and her Hydra have to use different tactics because that won't work. Like, the things you learn about the Eldrin then come to play in the narrative. The information you get is never throwaway. You always know that something at some point, knowing this about this creature, is gonna come in at some way, whether it's in the tournament or somewhere else. And I really like that. The world building never feels random just for the sake of having extra world building. And the fights themselves in the tournament were heart-pounding in some ways, but I don't know what it is about Shami Stovall, but she writes brilliant action sequences, because most writers and most readers have struggles with big action sequences in that trying to figure out exactly what's going on, and I always knew. I could always tell. This book, despite being 700 pages, like, the pages fly by really fast because you don't have to think that hard to imagine what's going on. Or at least I didn't. I didn't have to be like, okay, so the description is this, therefore it looks like this. Like, I didn't have to, like, pause and do that mental imagery. It came across in the words, which I really love, and Shami Stovall is really, really good at. I actually did have a couple moments in the story, though, and I only have two things that were a little bit iffy, and one of them is there are certain times in the book where Volk felt a little bit too much like a protagonist. And what I mean by that is that, yes, obviously he's the protagonist, but there are moments in books where the main character seems to have all of these special and cool and intriguing things happening to them, specifically them alone, at once. And for the most part in this series, Volk avoids that. For example, in the first book, he fails the Phoenix trial, and a person who was too protagonisty would have immediately won them. And in the second book, he's not the one with the thing with pirates. That's Ilya. And in certain points of that book, he almost felt like the secondary character whose eyes you just happen to be looking throughout that story. This is the one where there are certain parts where it felt like he was becoming a little bit too much of a protagonist, where, like, multiple possible love interests and like multiple different groups were asking him to join at certain points, and I won't say who or what groups, but I was like, wow, that's a lot of people interested in who is effectively an apprentice and therefore on the weaker side of the magic scale in this world. But without spoiling too much, things go to directions where a too protagonisty book would not go. So it kind of revitalized that, and it kind of pulled back from being way too protagonisty. But that is something to look through in the future books, because you have to keep in mind, he is an apprentice. Still an apprentice, a very, like, talented apprentice with a very strong Eldrin, a very cool Eldrin. I love the more broad looks at what a nightmare can do. So caution in the future. I don't know that Shami Stovall actually cares about my hints at all, or tips, but maybe make sure that he doesn't feel too much like everything cool is happening to him. Although, speaking of hints or tips that I've given before, this book did start out differently than the other two. I mentioned in my review for the sequel that both the first two books kind of began in a similar way with them searching for Eldrin, and I was like, that's fine opening, but, like, if it gets overused, it's probably going to be an issue. But it wasn't. This one wasn't how that started. So, glad about that. Don't know if it was my advice. I mean, Shami Stovall and I do talk, so it might have been. I don't know. But anyway, the big part about this book is the ending. And the ending. Okay. I went to write out my review for this book, and I saw that while it was majority positive, there was one 1-star review and one 2-star. So I was like, okay, I have to know. I have to see what these people said about this book that is so praised in every other review. What went wrong here? And the one that was a 2-star mentioned something to the effect of, the last 10% of the book, it got really dark. And in that review, they're like, too dark. But I was like, if you've read the series, it's not like it set things up to be lighthearted in the first place. The first book ends with the protagonist, childhood hero, coming out to be a serial killer that's trying to revive his zombie wife using, like, murdered Arcanist's Eldrin and a giant plague-ridden phoenix. Like, it kind of set it to be dark. Like, the scene of the pirate ship with all of the man-eating Eldrin coming in, like, you had to know it was coming, but this takes it to a whole other level. I was actually vlogging this as I was reading it because we're under social distancing and I got nothing else to do. So I'll actually put the vlogs that I read this in the description as well. So many links down there. And I'm going to show you a taste of my immediate reaction upon finishing this book. I'm not okay. So yeah, that was me. I was not okay. And this book does not leave you okay at the end. It is basically, at this point, a facet of Shami Stovall's writing style, both in this series and Starmark Rising, to have gigantic endings. And I love that. And in this series particularly, it always seems to end with a giant creature fighting at some point. And we get that. We get giant creatures fighting, which on one hand, yeah, maybe formulaic, but on the other hand, it's a really good formula. Like, I look forward to what giant creatures will be fighting at the end of the book every time in this series. Like, well, I mean, not the first one, obviously, but giant characters, giant creatures fighting at the end of the book is like, it's just a regular facet of her writing, and I adore it. But without revealing too much, things get really dark, and they low-key stay dark. Like, at the end of the first two, while, yes, the plague was still ongoing, and yes, Callisto was still out there, the dread pirate causing nonsense, it kind of left you with a little bit of an upkick. Like, okay, it'll be okay. I'm not sure it'll be okay this time. I actually did one of my favorite things to do, which is the thing you know when a book is good, and that's when you message the author and you're like, how dare you, you heartless bitch, you wrecked it, how can I live now, I am anxious, like that kind of message, which is how you know an author has really done it. And I sent that to Shami Stovall, and she thought it was funny. And, I'm so anxious for the next book in this series now because things go down, very big things. But for all that big things go down and they were dark and they weren't as uplifting or hopeful as the first two, it also felt very right in a way. Like certain plot beats that happened, even though they were horrible, felt like the right way for the plot to go based on what the plot has promised before, because there is this gigantic, world-changing plague, which now that I think about it, it's a really weird time to be reading a book about that. Anyway, there's a giant plague and there's a world serpent awakening and like things are hitting the fan. So a hopeful, oh, everything's cool, we defeated this one big bad and now we're done now, wouldn't have worked for this setup. And I don't know how many more books left in the series, but I don't fully trust Amazon when it says 3 of 4 for this book, because I cannot see everything being wrapped up in one more book with everything that is set up at the end of this one, unless it's like another 700-page book with less world exploration, because a ton of new things are introduced and a ton of new conflicts are introduced, and I'm so upset about that one. Regardless, it will wreck you, but in the best way that books wreck you, and I continue to adore this series. Shami Stovall's world building is just incredible, and from everything I've heard, this book has really taken off. I was talking to Shami before because I noticed that I both got a nice little bump in subscribers overnight at the same time that both of my reviews for the first 2 books in this series also got a bump in views. And so I went to Shami and I was like, hey, quick question, is your career taking off or something or what? And she goes, yeah, the 3rd book was received really well, and yeah, it's deserving of that praise, and I'm really happy that it's taking off for her. I don't know that I had that much to do with her career success, even though I've been a Shami Stovall stan channel since January of 2019. But I'm so happy about this. This is definitely a fantastic series. This is a fantastic series if you even don't like YA fantasy, because generally I don't gravitate towards YA fantasy all that much, but Volk is an adorable and noble soft boy who will always make the right decision, even though sometimes, even though he's done it for the noble reasons, it still scoops him over in weird ways. And the new character, the new Arcanist that was introduced, like, I saw it coming. I saw the bonding coming. She did the thing, and I was like, and I knew it was coming, and I loved it anyway, because you can know something is coming and still like it, because if it's the right play, it's the right play. So I loved this book a lot, and I know a lot of other people do too. I'm super excited / anxious / really in desperate need of the next one. But regardless, you should definitely check this one out. Check out the other two, although I don't know why you would have gotten to the end of this review full of spoilers if you hadn't already read those. If you want to check out more Shami Stovall, check out Starmark Rising. I know she has some alternate history fantasy with World War II, I believe. I have not read that series yet. It is on my list, but I will have to end up doing that eventually, because I love her so much. Her writing is fantastic, and I am so glad that a year ago I agreed to do my first indie book review with her. It is one of the best decisions I ever made on my channel. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you guys are staying safe and staying healthy and keeping your mental health in check in what is very rough times right now. But with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.